I want to welcome everyone this morning. And I want to thank our sponsors. Norm, I'll ask you to just forward. There we go. Thanks to all of our sponsors. Obviously, without your help and support, we couldn't be putting this great programming on. As you can see, we're using a Zoom format for this conference. Apropos to talk about this during a technology-related conference. We started with Zoom for our conferences months ago. Then we looked at 3 or 4 other platforms, tried them all, and found out that they all fell a little short. I guess the lesson there is with technology, you can look at and read and try and understand all the bells and whistles, but until you get out there and try it, you really don't know whether that technology is going to work for you or not. We've come back to Zoom. It's simple, but it works and it's effective. As our panel goes through the presentation today, you're likely to have questions. What I'm going to ask you to do is to put your questions in the chat, and then we'll get to those questions at the end of the program. I'll be the one that we selecting the questions and then relaying them to Norm to get to the panel. At the end of our programming, we're going to have a little networking session. So if you can, please join us. Each of the speakers will have their own room. And if you're on the right version of Zoom, you can just select which room you want to go into for the networking. If you're not, you'll stay in the main screen, and then Diane will circle back and just assign you to the room you want to be assigned to. So with that backdrop, I would like to introduce Norm Miller. If you could turn your camera and mic on, and Norm, I'll let you take it from here and introduce the great panel we have today. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. And before we introduce our panel, thank you all for attending. And I'm going to sort of set the stage a little bit with the topic of Proptech. So you see here that there are a lot of firms out there that might be classified as Proptech. And then one of them near the top there is now in Chapter 11, Katera. But these are firms that have products and services that some of you didn't know you needed. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they are and what's exciting and how it's going to affect the real estate industry. There's a lot of ways of trying to understand what's out there. One way to categorize Proptech is by function. And for example, if you were looking at property management, you could tag everything, every event, every light, every item in your facilities. And it can be equipped with sensors and connectors, and we can use actuators and machine learning to automate optimization. And that's what some of the firms out there are doing. But even without sensors, we can manage better with some of the applications that we'll talk about. Another way to categorize Proptech is the life cycle of a building. And this one makes sense to me. And here you have market analysis, financing and raising capital, land assembly, entitlement, design, build, valuation, leasing, operation and maintenance, harvesting and selling. And there are firms serving all of those different life cycles of a building. Although I do note again, we have a little shakeout under design, contracting, Katera's gone. Most of the firms are probably under building management systems. And again, there's thousands of them. So we're going to hit these topics at a pretty high level. We don't have time to go into great depth. We're going to give you some resources and hints as to where to look for more information. And if there's interest, we'll be happy to follow up in more depth on some of these. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel. At the lower left-hand corner there, Jim Young is the founder of Realcomm. He's a longtime friend and advocate and evangelist of commercial real estate and tech. I consider Jim kind of the father of this marriage of commercial real estate and tech because he was doing it long before anybody else. and he's been doing it for decades now. In the upper left-hand corner, we have Jeremy Gabe. He's a fellow professor at the University of San Diego. And he's got a long record of research in real estate sustainability, and he's going to help us connect the dots a little bit on ESG, climate tech, Proptech. Then in the right corner, we have Caren Maio, and she's the chairwoman and co-founder of Funnel. It's a renter-centric solution that automates multifamily leasing. She got her start in real estate technology more than a decade ago. She's been named one of the 3 female entrepreneurs to look out for by Metro, and one of 15 women to watch in tech by Inc.com. And she's going to talk not just about Funnel, but her whole perspective on Proptech. So before I ask any questions of our panelists and get started, Diane, could you bring up the first polling question for the audience? So please go ahead, put your answers in. Okay, thank you. So we have 40% of our attendees saying yes, they plan on making significant improvements in technology investments over the next year to make the buildings better or the processes more competitive. No, we have 12%. And then 48% either unsure or did not answer. So thank you for that. And if you can close the poll, okay. Jim, I want to start with you, please, on just saying, what is Proptech in your mind? Overview, please. And unmute there.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I got just a couple slides that I'm going to show in a second, but the first thing I think I want to say about Proptech is that there are various levels. And what I mean by levels of people's understanding, readiness to adopt. For example, I'll call it beginning, intermediate, and advanced. I was on a call yesterday with somebody who I would put maybe more in the beginner stage, asking basic questions about simple property management, collecting money, keeping track of tenants. And then on a call, 3 days ago or whenever, I'm talking with one of the most advanced companies in the world out of Silicon Valley, worth $7+ billion, who does not really work in the real estate industry, but is coming into the real estate industry with advanced facial recognition apps that we've never seen. So whenever I talk to somebody about Proptech, I try to get an idea of where are they in the spectrum of understanding it. Are you just getting into it? Are you young? Are you new to it? Or are you've been around it for 20, 30 years? That was one of the reasons that, sorry. I'm going to share my screen.
Let me stop share. Okay.
And then just tell me when you can see it.
We're good?
You're good. Okay, so let me just put that in. So we put this slide together, gosh, 10 years ago or so, because we started seeing a new generation of people coming into Proptech that thought this was the first time it's happened in the industry. And we said, we're excited for your excitement, but I'm a true believer in context. And I'm also a true believer in not reinventing the wheel. So I'd be on the phone with 10, 20, hundreds of startups. And they said, Jim, I got this great idea. And, I'd let them get it all out. And then I, unfortunately, time after time had to say, I hate to do this to you, but this is not a new idea. This is probably the 5th iteration of this idea that I've seen. And PS, why didn't you do your homework? And PPS, why didn't the people who gave you $5 million do their homework, right? Because concept is out there. So we put this together as a way of educating people on how long PropTech has been going on. As you see, phase one, early 1980s, property management, and then basic building automation. Two companies that come to my mind are Yardi and Johnson Controls, and big systems, big ideas. Phase two was the .com, .bomb era, and that was from 95-ish to 2002, where companies came out of nowhere, hiring hundreds, thousands of employees, only to be gone 6 months later. A couple of companies that came out of this in our industry were companies like LoopNet, CoStar. There were two, but along with those two, a lot failed. Phase three, we call the .bomb phase, post.com, and it was survival of the fittest. As I mentioned, companies like LoopNet and CoStar and others survived and became household names. Phase four started right after the financial crash. Lots of money, nothing to do. People came out and said, we're coming after PropTech. Now it's already been 30 years since PropTech started, but so many of those people thought they were going to reinvent this again. And that we actually say phase four ended in 2016 because we saw a new phase start to come in phase 16 or in 2016 that is now on the headlines of everybody. And that's all the AI, machine learning, blockchain, augmented reality, all the things making the headlines today. We started talking about at Realcomm in about 2016. The interesting thing about PropTech is if you have a good idea, it's got to integrate through all of these phases. If you've got a brand new IoT product, good chances are it's going to have to integrate into a Yardi or a Johnson Control. So this is just a little context setting. And then real quick, the next slide. I usually take an hour to give this presentation on PropTech. We don't have an hour, so I just wanted to put this slide up there to let the audience know how complex PropTech is. What's the issue in PropTech you want to talk about? The new startups and the funding? Do you want to talk about cyber and privacy? Do you want to talk about enterprise, smart buildings, IoT? There are so many different ways to approach PropTech, but the question I will leave with, and hope we'll get into in conversations later on, is what problem are you trying to solve? And number two, before you start automating anything, everybody needs to understand how technology is impacting how we use space. And that would be how Kmart or Walmart uses real estate to sell stuff and how Amazon uses warehouses to sell stuff. But hopefully we'll get through all these in some way, shape, or form in the conversation. And I'm looking forward to it. So that's it.
Good. Do you see my screen, the panelist again?
I do.
Thank you. Jim, follow up. I was going to ask you if firms like CoStar, Yardi, RCA, Reese, Comstack are PropTech firms, but you kind of answered that in your first question that they are. And these larger established firms are apparently one of the exit strategies for some of the startups. But could you help me define PropTech a little bit more? What does digitization of buildings mean? As an example, Boston Properties recently announced a program to digitize their portfolio. Can you explain that to us at all?
Well, interesting enough, Boston Properties has been in our community for over 20 years, 20 to 25 years. So they've been digitizing their buildings in their portfolio for 25 years. Jim Whalen, who's their chief information officer, is a good friend. So to Jim, the guy who's responsible to do that, digitizing probably touched every single one of those screens I just had up, every one of those topics, from cybersecurity and privacy and putting sensors inside buildings to automating HVAC, to streamlining his property management system, to streamlining his lease process, to getting rid of paper, to take those file cabinets and convert them to data warehouses, start applying artificial intelligence and machine-to-machine learning against that data. It's basically taking all the analog process of yesteryear whether it's, you know, a back office process like collecting money, or a front process like going into a building and checking a meter. All of those processes are automated, put into a combined, very sophisticated enterprise. And the result is lower energy consumption, better occupant experience, including health and wellness, saving money on operations, one truck roll instead of four. And at the end of the day, meeting your sustainability objectives. And finally, having a place that people really want to be so you can charge more rent, and having your expenses reduced because your systems and processes are so efficient.
That all makes sense to me, but then Colony Capital recently sold 80% of its real estate portfolio, $535 million. And they said they plan to use the proceeds for digital investments. Do you have an idea what they're buying?
Yeah, there's somebody to watch. Barrick is brilliant from way ever, and Mark Ganzi is equally as brilliant. And we're actually going to have them on a Realcomm. Mark's going to be on a Realcomm live episode coming up in a couple of weeks, I believe. Yeah, he's really one of the first guys in a long time that I've seen who's got real estate and tech DNA. He can talk, you know, cap rates as fast as he can talk bits per second. But I think the most important part is he just doesn't look at the details. He understands the fundamental shifts that are taking place, right? Meaning, you know, do I go invest in more Walmarts, or do I go invest in more Amazons? Or better yet, is there going to be somebody that's going to meet in the middle and combine Walmart and Amazon perfectly? And I think that's the kind of brain he's got. I think where they're going, he's very big into 5G. He's very big into the telecommunications infrastructure that's going to power Internet of Things for buildings, and what I just described, all these process automations. And I think he's going to be making big bets in the technology infrastructure that's going to really fuel the built environment. I think, as he says it, the highways, right? He wants to own the highways for which buildings will be able to operate in the future. So I think their strategy is still TBD. They're selling an awful lot of the old stuff and buying some of the new stuff, but definitely a guy to watch.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to come back to you with some general panel questions, but let's move on and ask Caren a few questions. Caren, can you tell us what funnel leasing does and how this fits into what you see in terms of general industry trends and innovation?
Absolutely. Thanks, Norm, and thrilled to be here with all of you today. So funnel leasing was really built with a B to B to C mindset in mind. And I say that being that, you know, we believe what's good for businesses is also good for the ultimate renter. We focus on multifamily, and we build software that empowers multifamily operators to streamline their marketing and leasing operations and deliver a modern 21st century leasing experience on the front end to their customers, the ultimate renter. You know, we feel like we're throwing the ball a bit ahead of the receiver here, largely when we think about experience. And frankly, you know, the reason why we started the business was the process of leasing an apartment didn't resemble the experience we were used to having in any other aspect of our life, right? Be it making a restaurant reservation, booking a hotel room, a rental car. And we looked towards other industries, namely hospitality, and said, you know, we feel it's only a matter of time before it makes its way to real estate, specifically our little corner of the world of multifamily real estate.
Thanks. Can you share with us some lessons learned on the multifamily owner side in terms of how to implement tech?
Yeah, you know, I think, I mean, there's some interesting trends we've certainly seen in the midst of COVID as we start working our way out of it. But I'd say largely, you know, folks are, I think COVID pushed folks, it sort of shined a light on inefficiencies in folks' operating procedures, right? Being able to say, okay, things that we thought were working maybe aren't working as well as we thought. I think, you know, it sort of accelerated development in the sense I often sort of liken, you know, first movers, second movers, third movers. I think it moved everyone up sort of a level where folks who are maybe second or third movers were now saying, okay, well, now I need to start thinking about experience. I need to start thinking about the experience I'm delivering. And it forced some of these initiatives to light, namely around Proptech and around delivering a really compelling experience to differentiate yourself in the market. Sorry, Norm, go ahead.
No, that's good. A question for you and my panel colleagues here, if they want to jump in as well. Will your technology and similar firms displace professionals in the commercial real estate industry the same way we saw in the travel agency market, the stock market, and so many other markets? As an example,
I'll jump in on that one, and
Yeah.
then I can let some others jump in. I think when technology works really well, it's meant to augment people and processes, not replace. And we've taken a pretty firm stance on that at Funnel. And as I advise other companies in the prop tech space, the ones I'm most excited about take that same approach of there's still, you know, even though to Jim's point, we're not necessarily in early innings where prop tech is now just starting, right? To his point earlier, it's been around for 20, 30 years. But we are, there's definitely a movement now towards automating some of those long-standing manual processes, right? And I think if we can use technology, and the way Funnel's setting out to use technology is to automate the mundane, automate those rote, repetitive tasks to save people for their best and highest. And that's how we think about fitting in that space. I'm curious to see what the other panelists are going to say here. But I think when technology is used effectively, it gives people their time back towards relationship building, revenue generating, needle moving opportunities.
Jim, you want to jump in?
I fundamentally agree that unless you stop the planet Earth from revolving, technology is going to continue to advance. And technology in its most simplest form is designed to take a past process, evaluate it, and make it more efficient, less steps, 10 to 2. And in that process, inevitably, you are going to eliminate human beings. I hope you eliminate human beings from the mundane task of stamping paid on an invoice, okay? I mean, that's not humans' best use. But it is incumbent upon the employer, the employee, companies, governments to encourage, incent, promote individuals to continue to advance their skills. Because if you just say, all I know how to do is stamp checks, then you are going to be left behind. And frankly, it's at least 50% your fault. So as technology continues to advance, there are, I've heard a figure, and I need to get it substantiated. There are 1 million unfilled cybersecurity positions in this country. Think about that, okay? From a national defense standpoint, from a Scripps hospital getting shut down standpoint, from a pipeline, colonial pipeline, we have 1 million holes in our dam that can't be filled. So if somebody's tired of stamping checks, let's get them into a college, into some type of a school, get them new skills, and start helping defend our national interests. So I've never been a believer that we should stop technology because you're going to put people out of work. Let the world advance, but come along with it.
Thanks. And Jeremy, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll really just echo Jim and Caren and say they're right. The skill set evolves. So you go from what was once a mundane task into spending all of your human capital on strategic decisions and providing more services. And anecdotally, I used to manage a whole bunch of high-tech sustainable buildings, and we actually used more human capital to do that, but we did 5 or 6 times more in terms of the output.
Got it. So it was a higher bar, a higher service level than before.
Norm, let me tell one more anecdotal story on this topic. I'm in Tokyo, 2004, having dinner with a guy named Matt Spathis out of San Diego that you may know. We went on a tour to look at smart buildings in Asia. And a girl came up to our table with a little automated order taker. And we were all in them. What are you doing? She goes, well, I'm taking your order from the table. And we were like, all these technology guys. I know it's not a big deal today, okay? But she was taking order. And while the order was being placed, she was talking to us. And then while she was talking to us, the beer came out and the sushi came out. And I came back to the United States, and from 2004 to about 2015, 16, until I got totally fed up and tired, including every restaurant on Fifth Avenue in San Diego, I go to the owners. Why don't you have these things? Why don't you have these things? It's more efficient. You don't have to make all those trips back to the kitchen with the tick. And every single one of them said to me, it's impersonal. That's not the way I want to run my business. Okay. And now finally, 2021, we're starting to see them in a lot of restaurants here in San Diego.
Yeah, we are.
Tell me why. Tell me why.
Oh, we're saving money, and it's faster.
No, but why were they so resistant is the question.
That's a whole nother panel. So
I mean, like, that's an interesting point though, that Jim brings up. And like, I think a big thing to keep in mind, because we still come up against this, I'm still having conversations around this. It's very important to meet consumers where they are. And while we might think, oh, that sacrifices experience, I would challenge folks to really think about what the consumer wants. If I'm used to, I don't know if you can see with my virtual background, but if I'm used to booking a restaurant reservation, a car, anything I want, whenever I want, however I want, I think it's really important that we push ourselves and we challenge ourselves, that the relationship will become strong. The relationship will feel personal if you allow consumers to transact the way they want to transact.
Well, but just to make sure we don't lose this point, everybody told me it was not personal enough to take the order at the table. Now think about it this from a mathematical standpoint. In our world, they take the order on their little piece of paper. It takes them 3 to 5 minutes to run back to the kitchen to put the order in. In Tokyo in 2004, that same 3 to 4 minutes was spent communicating with us, building a bond with the customer, laughing, us getting to exchange cultures. And at the same time, the beer got run to the table by somebody else because the order was already electronically in the kitchen. The issue is, why did the US resist? All the restaurant owners here in San Diego and every restaurant I visited in the US, why were those restaurant owners resistant to that idea when in fact it wasn't impersonal? It actually expanded the interpersonal communications. That's what is at the heart of this whole Proptech issue, is adoption, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We're going to continue with ESG. We're going to come back and we'll have a Q&A session. I want to remind everybody, we're going to make sure we have some time for that. But Jeremy, continuing on with you, what is ESG and what does it have to do with Proptech?
Yes, thanks, Norm. So ESG is an acronym. It stands for Environmental and Social Governance, and really it's just a synonym for what was formerly called corporate social responsibility and sustainability before that. So to sort of go on Jim's riff, it's been around for 20, 30 years now. And
Thank you. I didn't want to just be the only person saying that.
yeah, so essentially it's non-financial performance outcomes from private business, like from real estate activity. So reduce pollution, resource efficiency, and enhance social well-being. And anything that doesn't directly relate to a financial bottom line. I just see it as an innovation challenge for entrepreneurial America. It was once a differentiation opportunity. Again, that ship has sailed. And the point I really want to get across today is that it's now really an obsolescence risk for those that ignore it. Because ESG is really what I see as a disruptive technology in Norm's matrix pyramid. Because the companies that are involved in climate risk and climate tech, they're providing new services. So it's not what I call the evolutionary Proptech strategy of where you're automating things you already do, or you're just getting bigger data to do the things you already do with smaller data. So for example, like the shift to renewable energy is going to provide a whole raft of new opportunities to use real estate productively, like specifically retail. And business disruption risk and resiliency to climate change and sea level rise can now be modeled, reported, and priced into the capital markets. So governments now are also getting more interested in the public good from ESG, and that just further increases the risk of what I call environmental and social obsolescence risk.
Jeremy, you brought up an example as to obsolescence risk, and let's go ahead and look at that now. Why don't you talk about this building? It's actually 1515 Clarence Street in Sydney.
Yeah, so 151 Clarence Street. But so that's
151.
yeah, it's fine. And it's so there's an office building. I think Norm's got a slide up there. And that office building there, you know, fairly unremarkable, but it was one asset in a big portfolio acquired by Investa, which is one of Australia's biggest property funds. Kind of one of those late 80s, early 90s office buildings that this was 2008, sort of seen as a core plus investment. Like you could put a little bit of money, the fund expected to put about $3 million into it. The tenancy profile was really good at the start. So one of Australia's big four banks leased about 60% of the space. They had been there for a long time. Nothing was functionally wrong with the building. It was a standard, again, a border between A and B class office building. But it used lots of energy. And for those that knew where to look into ESG reporting, tech, and tools, it was one of Sydney's largest greenhouse gas emitters per square foot. Then in November 2011, the government passed mandatory disclosure for energy, much like CA-AB 802. And now everyone knew that. And they had to, as you can see in the slide, make that very explicitly clear that they were one of the worst buildings in Sydney. And that's not a big deal. That the costs of energy were almost nothing to the tenants. And there was even a carbon tax at the time. So that tenants weren't really worried about that. But suddenly a core plus investment quickly turned into a full-scale $110 million redevelopment. And so, yeah, next slide. The major tenant made it clear that it was going to do a public exit. It signed a lease in what's called Barangaroo, which is the Hudson Yards of Sydney. And on the way out, made lots of public statements about ESG performance of the upcoming Barangaroo Hudson Yards-like development as a driver for their move. And now Investa, who actually had a very strong sustainability strategic outlook, they suddenly had an ESG obsolescent building and made it clear that, you know, they were now going to have to do a $107 million unplanned capital raise. And during that, when they redeveloped and tore down the building and rebuilt it, it was going to implement all of the ESG tech that it needed to be competitive for these high level tenants.
Thanks for that. Diane, related to ESG, could you put up our next poll question, please?
And then Norm, I'm gonna, if I could share my screen again, that Jeremy's comments prompted a slide I'd like to show.
Yeah, as soon as we get the poll done, let's do that. So do you plan on increasing ESG related disclosures or taking actions to become more energy efficient over the next year? Yes is about 25% there. No, 13%. Unsure or didn't answer, 63%. Jim, go ahead and I'll stop share.
Yeah, so before I share, I just want to make a point. Jeremy is absolutely right. This is the fourth time in my career that at least the E in ESG has been brought up. S is kind of new, but has always been my mind a practical way to run a business. And governance has been around since the Roman Empire, so, or even before. So it is not new. It is just not new. And what we're going to do at Realcomm is we're going to force people to have honest ESG conversations. In other words, you know, you have a building in downtown Manhattan that's moderately smart, moderately controlling its use of energy, and yet you require 80% of the employees to do 2-hour commutes on carbon vehicles. That's not sustainable. Okay, so this whole idea of just let's get everybody back in the office, because I'm an absolute proponent of people being together, collaborating, being in physical spaces. But this old model of, you know, taking 1, 2-hour, 3-hour commutes into a place every single day. And then the second one on the retail side, somebody gets up on a podium and screams ESG, I'm going to ask them one question. How much do you shop from Amazon? Do you really believe it's sustainable to order one toothbrush manufactured in China, shipped to Long Beach, trucked to Riverside, and then brought to your front door one box at a time? We really want to have a sustainability conversation. So we love technology. We are all for process automation, but we're not going to have a surface level conversation. We're going deep and we're going wide. And let me give you an example of that. I'm going to share my screen. What I'm about to show you is, Jeremy bringing up that building made me think of this hotel in Texas. Can you see my screen?
We do.
Okay, so this guy is absolutely brilliant. It's a Marriott hotel. He's half technologist, half real estate, a lot like Mark Ganzi. And he said, I'm going to do it. This hotel is a low voltage hotel. Okay, so what does that mean? That means instead of diesel generators in his basement, he's got battery walls. He didn't go with Tesla, he went with Samsung because he convinced the Samsung technologists to tweak the physics in their batteries. So he's got this battery wall in the basement. As you can see, he's got low voltage lighting. This guy has invented, or encouraged to have invented, a low voltage mini fridge in all of the rooms in the hotel. Well, what does that mean? That means you take an RJ45, a computer cable, you plug it into this little mini fridge. It's enough electricity running over that computer cable to cool your beverages and your snacks, at the same time reporting data back to the front desk that somebody just took out a Snickers bar and it needs to be replaced. That is sustainable, okay? You run a hotel on low voltage. Now, of course, there are some AC applications. This is what gets the world from stop burning carbon. Okay, that's the kind of sustainability we dig for in the Realcomm and IBCOM community.
Yeah, I think that's low voltage, solid state, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and so you know what he's working on right now? He's working on hair dryers, a low voltage hair dryer, because that's one of the most hardest things to figure out in a hotel room because it requires that heat. And he's going to have like a battery run, a Tesla of the hair dryers, that when you're done using it, you put it back on the shelf and it charges the battery via low voltage. This guy's onto something very, and PS, low voltage conversations have been around for a long time, but they're really starting to show what they're capable of. And if you want a sustainable future, you want to meet that E of the ESG, these are the kind of places you got to look.
Hey, Norm Stather, I know we were thinking about waiting till the end for questions, but there is one question here that we may want to ask that is around this particular subject. Comes from Randy W. Is wired score certification important as we move further into Proptech centric environment? Will it be on par with LEED, well building, and Energy Star at some point? Anyone want to take that one on?
Let me ask Jeremy if he wants to comment on that. Plus, if you want to comment more broadly on the fact that there's many measurement standards out there globally.
Yeah, so that's about what I was going to say. There's a lot of certification, there's a lot of activity in the certification space, and I don't want to get into the weeds and try and unpack or pick winners from that. But I wanted to also, I mean, just to sort of, again, pick up and expand on Jim's last point there about the Sinclair Hotel there in Dallas. If you were to ask me like what technologies is going to be really important in ESG or the climate tech, I'd say it's this transition to renewable energy, because that's, you know, again, it's truly disruptive by, you know, taking out diesel boilers, putting in battery banks as the primary source that's going to power the building. And right now, like the state of California is doing their best to almost give away batteries and battery storage to building owners that are making redevelopment decisions now. And so I think that's one of the biggest, best subsidies available right now, because this is going to be the future, whether it's low voltage and what you do with that power. You know, I'd agree that low voltage and understanding how to use that power most efficiently and get away from the high wattage microwaves and hair dryers or reinvent them. But you know, this transition to renewable energy, electric cars, that's going to accelerate the obsolescence of gas station. It's going to create an oversupply of mechanics because you don't need to service those cars as much. And really that's going to put the ball in retail real estate's court, because now there's a huge opportunity to capture customers waiting for these half-hour long charges, and they can use real estate while they wait, because there's going to be more opportunity to entertain and capture their attention.
Let me add,
Norm, can I just weigh in on that standards question a little bit?
yeah, let me add my 2 cents on hotels. I think that the quickest way to improve sustainability in hotels is to turn things off. And the way European hotels do, you know, to turn off all your stuff. I mean, That to me is a simple solution that American hotels have barely embraced at this point. I do have two other questions, or three, on Proptech that I want to make sure we get to before the Q&A, but go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. So on the standards issue, standards are good for the masses. They play an important role in business and society. But for the truly innovative, the standards that have been mentioned are all in the rearview mirror for the truly innovative. You just sit down and really want to solve problems, you are not going to try to get to a lead standard. We joke in the Realcomm community, you know, when they were going for platinum, we were going for not titanium, because I just learned that's not higher than platinum, but a metal way higher than platinum, because, you know, while lead was talking about, you know, some construction materials and some basic stuff, we were talking about putting networks on top of buildings and squeezing on inefficiencies. So for the people who want to play it safe, standards are good. For the true innovators, set your own standards.
Thanks, Jim. I do want to get back to a couple of general questions on Proptech. For Jim and Caren in particular, can you suggest some applications that you feel are changing the way we lease, manage, transact in the real estate industry? And by way of example, if I'm a landlord, I want to look into access control. There's firms out there like Latch, Butterfly, MX, OpenPath, and Forge, and others. And I really don't know who to pick. And by the way, Forge was just bought by Yardi. Maybe that's a good signal. But can you mention a few of the applications that you think are changing the industry without necessarily naming firms, but you're welcome to name firms if you want?
Caren, you want to go first?
Just about to ask you the same question. I'll go first.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I can.
No. I mean, all good. I think there are certainly trends that I'm seeing that personally I'm very excited about. You know, one, and obviously I'm biased here, right? But all the work that Funnel's doing is setting out to streamline exactly what you just said, Norm, right? So obviously very, very excited about the trends there. I also think offering flexibility to residents is very important. We're seeing flexible rental solutions coming out, various programs and amenities that can be activated as a competitive differentiator today, but as table stakes tomorrow. And then certainly access, but I think the broader theme around all of these things is around reducing friction in the process for teams and delivering a compelling modern experience to our customers, the client, right? So I'd say on a broad basis, we're seeing solutions that are meant to deliver better experiences. And it's not just a better experience on one side, it's on both sides. It's the business side as well as the consumer or customer side. Jim,
Okay. Norm, I hate to do this, but I want to share again, if I can. I'm a visual learner. Let me share my screen. Can you tell me when you can see it? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so to answer your question, what specific applications do I think are, you know, kind of the new ones of today? And I could come up with a list. When we were in Nashville in 2019, the theme of that particular conference was occupant experience applications, meaning I can go into a building and on my cell phone, I can control the whole building from the elevator access and you know, the light in my office when I get up there and scheduling or buying a cup of coffee. It was called occupant experience. That was the big buzz of 2019. Seems like centuries ago now, right? But what I'm showing you on the screen is the map of a corporate real estate enterprise, not a commercial. We built this one out a little bit further. Every one of those little lines represents an application, okay? And so what we tell people is, of course, if you see an easy hit to save some money and build some efficiencies, go for it. But if you don't have an enterprise architecture or an enterprise map for all of your applications, it doesn't have to be this complicated, but you know, in a commercial, I got parking, I got, you know, collecting rent, I got tenant maintenance requests, I got all sorts of things that happen in my real estate portfolio. You need to do this, you need to list them all, then you need to see what buckets they come into. These are corporate real estate finance, connected facilities, you see the my bucket. They all need to touch each other because the data has to be interrelated. The one in the middle is the warehouse where the data resides. And it's there that you're going to do things like machine-to-machine learning and artificial intelligence to start applying sophisticated smarts to how you run your portfolio, either from an operational side or as Caren said, the occupant experience, the tenant experience side. So my short answer is there are cool new widgets out there. Look at them all, take the easy hits, but you better be able to plug them into an enterprise architecture. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of processes disconnected, a little more automated, but you'll put yourself into a corner.
Yeah, I think thinking holistically about your strategy is incredibly important. The one piece of advice that I would give to operators, having seen some cycles, is change management is hard and it's a heavy lift. So, mapping this out and looking at your strategy holistically is very important, but I can't stress enough, I would focus on a couple of core initiatives for your business and rally everyone in your organization around that and go all in. Because I think where I've seen implementations fail, even when both sides have the best of intentions, is when you don't have buy-in top down, bottoms up, right? This will be a lift no matter how simple and straightforward the tech appears to be, and it could be. But if there's internal strife around how to implement it or to implement it, you're going to make life a lot harder on yourself. So
I totally agree. The change management part of this is by far the most important, most critical, most innovation stopping part of this whole conversation.
Thanks, guys. I want to ask Jeremy to jump in on
Norm, you're sharing a screen. I don't know if you know that.
the wrong one.
Well, it's bios and probably the wrong one.
Okay.
It's your stock portfolio. Norm, it's your stock portfolio.
Yeah.
Your bank password.
There we
thanks,
go.
Thanks, guys. So Jeremy, I'm looking at a bunch of apps out there for different things: access, security, visitor control, building management, operations, energy, whatever it is. Can you give us a few tips on filtering and what's important about looking at some of the applications and vendors out there?
Yeah, so this falls into that bucket of that strategy of like automating things you already do, increasing these smart buildings. And I think one of the biggest tips that I can offer is that you're getting into the language of computing, the language of machines. And I really urge you to think about that as a foreign language. And like, if I were going to say, if somebody asked me like, what language should I learn if I'm going to study a new language? Sure, learn French, Spanish to communicate with humans. But I think the most important language that I could tell my son right now to learn would be Python or a computer code, because that's the language that these machines speak to each other. And one of the big issues with automating buildings, Jim kind of brought up already, is that you've got to integrate it with the stuff that was developed 20, 30 years ago in a different language. You've got all of these thousands of Proptech companies that are automating things. Some of them will succeed and they're using the own languages that they're comfortable with. So when you think about an automated process, think about whether the firm really thought about how its technology integrate and can talk the language of other technologies that it's going to have to work with within that machine ecosystem that Jim just showed from his screen.
Yeah,
I think that's really important.
On that note, Jeremy, yeah, you keep talking. I'm just going to give you a slide to substantiate exactly what you're saying. Yeah, that's your smart building process right there.
Yeah, so it has to be standardized. It has to talk to the building management system.
And I think one of the issues is that these firms want to capture market share by doing everything proprietary. And I think that's a really big risk, because you buy proprietary hardware or any kind of proprietary equipment, and it has a huge risk of being obsolescent in the future because the next big thing won't talk to that proprietary software. Yeah. So this is where the benefit of open source, really find firms that are doing the things that you want to do in the broadest way that as possible with the broadest amount of applications, just like Jim showed in that ecosystem.
And it also has to be secure, cyber secure. We're not going to have time to go into detail on that, but another criteria I happen to use is I want somebody involved in the commercial real estate industry in that vendor. I don't want to see that it was started by 3 programmers from MIT that know nothing about real estate. I want some experience on the real estate side on the advisory board and the key managers.
Hey, Norm, if I can, I've got a question or two that have come to me directly, and this might be a good time to ask one of them.
Sure.
So, unless you're a large company with a CIO or somebody at that level, how does one go about, doing the due diligence and trying to understand, what works and what doesn't for their application? Are there firms or people or companies that, that consult on this on a regular basis?
Staff, I actually have answered this question in San Diego at your event and other events over the last 10 years. Okay. I mean, this is a continue, and that's a really fair question because smaller companies can't afford the technical staff that some of these big. Think about the disadvantage that the Five and Dime owner had to this guy named Sam Walton as he was putting satellite dishes up and automating the retail process. Here's the short answer. I suggested it to IRM, BOMA, various organizations. I think your role, Burnham-Moores, could play a big role for the smaller companies. Create a consulting consortia where maybe you hire one or two consultants to act for all of your community, that they could leverage each other and not ask the same question twice. If you don't have your own internal staff, you most likely can't do it by yourself. You need help, but leverage each other. Get 10 small firms, create a little consortium, hire one consultant, go through it together. Don't let everybody do it along the way by themselves.
Jim, let me follow up with this question and comment. You and I both know that there's over 3,000 of these Proptech firms just in the US, many more than that globally. In fact, there's more outside the US than in the US. So don't you think we're a little bit in the .com era right now of Proptech, that is of the 3,000 or so in the US? 10 years from now, there's going to be what, 300?
Well, I was there on the day, I'm old enough I was there on the day in 2001 when the phone stopped ringing, okay? So I've been through these cycles before. I know what they look like, I know what they feel like, I know what they smell like. You can let everybody convince you that this is the new normal and that 1 + 1 does equal 8, or you can come back to common sense saying it does not. Yes, I believe we are radically oversupplied with Proptech companies, many of which don't know what they're doing, don't know that they've got 5 competitors, don't know that their product has been part of an enterprise solution for 15 years. And I wish we could get through it, because the real magic happens on the other side when we stop talking hype and we start talking really specific applications and problems that we need to solve.
Yeah, at the same time, I'm not suggesting that 90% are going to go away and disappear totally. Some of those are going to be incorporated into larger firms, the Yardis,
Absolutely.
the CoStars,
Yeah.
right? Caren, did you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this quite a bit when we were all chatting last week. I think consolidation is real, and we're going to see it come to fruition over the next 12 to 24 months, where, for the longest time you had big co, right? Whether that's Yardi, CoStar, RealPage, white space in between, and then a long list of startups or Proptech startups. I think we're going to see an acceleration where some of those companies will die, right? Which we saw last week. We'll see companies consolidate, merge together, and we'll see some companies naturally grow through organic growth and start to graduate to those next levels or two, right? That's happening, and I believe it's happening up and down the market. And what that means for Proptech and the investors in those companies, that's potentially another panel, another conversation. But I think consolidation is happening, and frankly, I think it's overdue at this point.
Yep. And I'll give you a specific example. In 2001, Realcomm had 200+ vendors. There was another competing conference, or another conference called PikeNet, for those of you who are old enough. Peter had about 100 vendors. So the ones who could afford to go to a conference, let's call it 350. The very next year, Peter Pike's PikeNet was gone. Peter was gone, and our exhibit floor went down to about 75. Okay, so I don't know if it'll happen that fast, because there's a lot of cash in the system right now, and people are just lasting longer than they should. But I heard of another company going out of business yesterday, So I agree with you, Caren. It's starting, and I think it's long overdue.
Yeah, we did have Katera, which 1.9 billion, which was a bit of a shocker. I have a lot of other questions, but I'm going to go to staff and handle a few more attendee questions, and then I do have a wrap up on our discussions here.
Yeah, so I've got a couple that came, one in the general box, a couple that came to me. So let's go to the general box from Fabiana. So, we talked about, I think, Jim, you said 1 million, high-tech jobs that are needed.
Cyber, just cyber security.
Cyber, okay. So the question is, a huge investment in employee training is required as they move away from mundane tasks. So is anyone aware of major programs in place for that? Everyone talks about it, but is it really happening somewhere?
I wish it was at every junior college on the planet. We've heard IFMA is doing some things, trying to fill their next generation facility manager job holes. There's isolated universities like University of South Dakota or South Dakota State and Kentucky, where they've got programs for smart buildings, smart processes. But the short answer is staff, nowhere near enough.
Any other comments from the other speakers?
The best thing we got, not to be self-promotional, is come to the Realcomm IBCon events community, and if you're interested in the subject, we can get you pointed into the little bit of education that's out there. But there is a huge job market waiting to be tapped.
So just coming from it, staff,
go ahead, Jeremy. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the educational side, working in that space, I think I get this challenge, every year when I think about teaching new things about the course, like how do I integrate Proptech into, say, Burnham-Moores Center courses? And it's a challenge because of what I said earlier about you need to speak the language of machines really to get into the weeds about Proptech. And, the students that are coming through the pipeline don't have those skills. We're talking about, high-level university students as well, not just junior college students. And I think that's a major public investment challenge at the moment, is really thinking about how to make human capital flexible. It was something I wish was more emphasized in these, COVID stimulus packages. Like, while people are sitting on the sidelines, sure, remote learning is not as good as the in-person thing, but, activate some of that while we're all sitting around. And I think that's a massive public challenge and something I'm always looking at when I look at public policy.
Well, Jeremy, to that point, the problem starts way earlier, at least in the United States, with K through 12. All you need to do is spend 30 seconds on the internet and understand how fast K through 12, specifically 8 through 12 math and science stats in the United States have dropped. I think we're now 30th in mathematics globally, okay? So the problem starts very young, where I think we're spending way too much teaching things in schools that aren't important. We've abandoned math and science. Our little company has tried to support math and science by helping high school kids put experiments on the International Space Station. We've raised money for math and science. But until everybody, including parents, wake up to the fact that our kids are radically undereducated on the fundamental science stuff, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. And that's the core. That's the core of the problem. This needs to start in 6th grade. I think in Romania, they start programming in Python in 1st grade. Okay, so figure how smart they're going to be by the time they're in 12th grade.
So Jim, kind of along those lines, and Jeremy, because of the time you've spent outside of the US, people look at Silicon Valley and think it's a center, of the universe for technology. And I think the follow-up assumption is that, that the US in technology, and I'm going to talk specifically about Proptech, is probably further advanced. So the question is, how does the U.S. compare in terms of its adoption of technology for real estate compared to other parts of the world that the two of you, and maybe you as well, Caren, have been involved in?
I'll sort of echo a point that Jim said earlier, that I think adoption is the big challenge for the U.S. So for those who don't know, I'm actually currently sitting in New Zealand. And I can say that when I first moved to New Zealand in 2004, about 2 years after I got here, I could transfer money bank to bank with absolutely no cost and no issue. I could waive my credit card over payment portals. There's a lot more experimentation. Yes, it's a small market over here, but adoption of technology overseas is actually a little bit more advanced. I think if you're looking at corporate real estate innovations, I think you have to look towards Europe right now. They're really looking to think about tenant-centric, occupant-centric innovations and thinking about the tenant's business along with the service provisions in there. So I think while the US may have a lot of entrepreneurial activity and innovation, I think the adoption is actually going faster overseas. And we also have to think about East Asia has a lot of innovation and adoption that isn't even on the radar of most American real estate owners and landlords.
And
Can I go next on this?
Yeah, let me just add to Jeremy. Jeremy, and you're a part of the ESG story. We got to observe in Europe how market transparency and disclosures affected the market, and you gave an example of how it affected the market in Sydney, in Australia. Yeah. So that's another reason they're ahead of us, isn't it? The fact that they have more market transparency on some things.
Yeah, well, Australia used it to say like, hey, we're down in the bottom of the world. We need strategies to bring capital down here. So I think a lot of the ESG innovation in Australia is actually driven by the capital markets so there's Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, GRESB, which some of you may know, that's ranks large funds, and it would allow these Australian firms to basically get on a global platform and attract capital down there by getting on the top of those lists. And so ESG, certainly from social governance perspective, has also been a lot more important to governments that have a stronger social welfare outlook than the U.S.
Jim?
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So this one's near and dear to my heart. I've been studying Chinese technology for at least 15 years. Both my daughters speak Mandarin. Okay. So I get what's going on over there. And these companies, some you may know, some you may not, Alibaba, Baidu, Hikvision, Huawei. These are the Silicon Valley companies of China. And in my humble opinion, they're 5-7. Some people could even speculate because of momentum trajectory 10 years ahead of us. They just landed a Mars rover. They're on the moon. They launched a 6G satellite, not 5G. They've got interoperability to the point where they're automating civilization with something called social credit scoring. Their consumer drone industry, port for port, Huawei versus some of our best network technology. If I could show one slide to the 360+ million people in the United States, including infants, to pay attention to is the dominance of Chinese technology. And if we don't do something like get our acts together with math and science again, another 5 years, it's over. We will not recapture our dominance in technology, period. That's it.
Thank you, Jim. Norm, I've got a couple more questions, and then maybe we can do the wrap up.
Sure.
So one question that came in addition to Yardi, are there similar one-stop shop platforms you see deployed in the world?
One-stop shop platform.
Can you repeat that? Norm, can you repeat that?
Well, the question is whether, I think that whoever asked that question, that's one of the problems. Landlords want a one-stop shop. They don't exist.
Okay.
Well, they do. They do.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
There's two categories. There's two buckets. One-stop shop from one vendor, which means they provide the architecture to give you just about everything they possibly can, every application imaginable. And then they're pretty tight, usually like a Yardi, pretty tight, but they'll open it up with APIs. So like a VTS can talk to a Yardi. So that's one option. And in the Yardi bucket, there's MRI, there's JD Edwards and others, okay? Then in the other bucket of one-stop shop is you go an MRI strategy, which is not necessarily one stop. There is more of a start with us as the kernel, and we'll offer you a best of breed where we've got this ecosystem where you can pick different applications that integrate with our foundation, but you have choice. So there are two flavors of one-stop shop, and they penetrate 80% of the marketplace. That's out there in a big way.
Jim, they have a slightly different viewpoint. You have a much better understanding of the applications of what's out there than most people. And you see integrators that integrate connectivity or have great building management systems. But I think from the landlord's point of view, they want somebody who's already pre-screened the vendors, put the best applications together, and it's really turnkey. And I think
for that, that's not there. That's not there.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
I think it's happening informally right now, right? So like we use the Proptech funds as an example. You have many owners who are LPs in those funds, right? And they're using those funds as almost screeners, right? Or filters for the companies that they should be considering, right? You have sort of mini cohorts of owners getting together to discuss technology, to discuss what's working, what's not, lessons learned. I love Jim's idea of putting together something. And, the third option is you also have folks hiring consultants, right? Hiring folks like McKinsey to come in, evaluate their processes and make suggestions and actually improve their strategy. I love Jim's suggestion of putting together a consortium of folks that's sort of the industry for the industry. I think that makes a ton of sense because it's happening right now, but it's happening on an ad hoc, informal basis.
And it's happening one at a time. Everybody's sitting down and having to build a roadmap. Everybody's sitting down and having to do vendor selection. If you did it as a group, you'll learn together, plus you'd save money. And there are some good consultants in our industry. There's probably a dozen that are real estate technology focused. Somebody like a Real Foundations and others, Cone Resnick. And then we've got a slew of consultants in the smart building space. So they're out there, but I just think it needs to be done holistically, like Caren said, and not waste any more time. I mean, you need to do it, find the shortest path to the finish line and just do it.
Yeah. My thinking with consolidation, right, is it's a struggle for owners today because you either have to choose between all in one, right? And do you unlock Yardy's 85 different products in their suite, or do you go best in breed, right? And then you need to think through and really tease through the integration components and challenges, and there will certainly be challenges, right? But to Jim's point earlier, right, there's varying levels, I think, of openness, right? You have someone like MRI where it's sort of, okay, open, pick your flavor of leasing, marketing, et cetera. Yardy, which is becoming more open, but they do have products as well. And it's a real challenge for owners. Do I want all in one or do I want best in breed? I think we're trying to move towards a world personally where we're guiding owners towards best of both worlds, where you have a platform that's wide enough in scope that can take on more of those workflows, where it's not just replacing one product, but a whole sort of set of workflows. And it still integrates with whatever PMS you're using. That being said, there are many, many companies in the market right now where at best they are products, at worst they are features. And
absolutely.
That's why I think consolidation needs to happen, because not only will it be just a broader win for the industry, but for customers, for operators, being able to bite off more of a product or more workflows. So they're not just adding these niche offerings on top. And then you go from one system to 80. Nobody wants that.
You so well said. So well said.
Thanks,
Yep.
Jim.
Another question, Caren, maybe for you. Being that you're, a founder and scaling a company, so historically, when you look at the proliferation of Proptech companies out there, a good idea, a strong salesperson, and some maybe not so intelligent capital, put a lot of money into the system, and we can always reflect on the Theranos, I think was probably the poster child for that. So
There's
the
more
question,
coming. There's more coming.
well, the question for all of you, and Caren in particular, is capital getting a little smarter about its kind of due diligence and investing based on, I would say, some of the failures that have occurred historically?
I think it very much depends on the firm, on their thesis. One of our lead investors, Camber Creek, has always taken a very surgical approach to the way that they invest. They do not make bets, right? They make very, very, very thoughtful decisions because they do a ton of diligence. They do a lot of research. They have the benefit of their LPs where they're really making thoughtful investment decisions. That feels to me, at least in my experience, more of the anomaly than the sort of standard, sort of SOP for venture capital. But yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm constantly having conversations with founders. Just because you can raise at a 50x multiple to your revenue does not mean you should, because the more money you take down, right, at particularly these sky high valuations, everything needs to go right. You have to execute flawlessly between now and the next one, right? The next raise. Otherwise, you're going to get burnt, right? You're going to get, it will catch up with you. The valuation game will catch up with you. And whether you go through a flat round, a down round, you don't have the benefit of raising money again at all. I'm having conversations much more frequently these days than ever around being really thoughtful around the types of rounds you're putting together, who's at the table, the valuation, and not just optimizing for that short term. I want the highest valuation, the most money, because there's so much more that goes into it. And you're not always setting yourself up for success if you're taking the highest value term sheet.
And Caren, again, you just nailed it. I'm old enough to remember 2001, 20 years ago, the exact same conversation, okay? And all the hype and all the people pushing and pushing and pushing when you knew it just did not make financial sense. And I'll give you another to pile on what you said about the feature set. I had somebody get all excited about an application. I let them finish. And when we were done, I said, do you realize that what you just showed me was, a feature set inside of an application embedded inside of an enterprise solution? And he goes, what do you mean? I go, I've seen that bit of process automation in one small little, corner of an application. And yet that person got $5 million. There was no due diligence done. No due diligence done. So the question begs is when.
Well, Jim,
when's the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, as you know, part of it is storytelling. And I think Caren described the view of some of the firms out there, get the highest valuation, tell a good story, and then we'll figure out how to make it work. We'll get the right advisors and consultants on board, hire the right people. And it's amazing there's so much money flowing into it. But Caren, the reason you're here is because you have the strategy of a survivor, and we wish you luck.
There's a reason Camber Creek chose Caren. She's right. One of the most articulate folks I've heard, as well as Jeremy. And I'm glad to see the younger generation taking hold and being smart, asking tough questions. There's no doubt both of them are going to be very successful.
Staff, should I summarize and then we have breakout room?
Well, summarize, I've got a few quick announcements, and we're not going to have a whole lot of time for breakout, but we'll do what we can, yes.
Okay, let me summarize, and then we will take care of the follow-up. So there's four points to summarize our discussion, as well as some I had last week with my panel here. COVID's pushed the commercial real estate industry into new higher standards for occupants, visitors, caretakers. Landlords want a one-stop shop. They don't exist yet, nor does standardization of building management systems, but there are some dominant players out there. We didn't name a whole lot of them, but some of the names like Johnson Controls and others. Established firms offer some of the solutions, but the startups like Karen's firm tend to be really innovative, and they will have a big influence on the industry. Secondly, new data sources are changing the way we do business. Drones, cell phone tracking, foot traffic, visual images, facial recognition, and of course, sensors that can be put into a building. And with expert systems or machine learning, you can improve actionable decisions. It includes marketing, occupant productivity, security, realistic trade areas, internal optimization, elevators, and so forth. And third, there's too many firms out there trying to help us digitize and automate the commercial real estate industry. At a minimum, they have to be secure, work with existing platforms. And filters should include commercial real estate experience, significant capital raised, and limited outsourcing of critical systems. And last, ESG and sustainability are the new reporting priorities and requirements, and some of these go hand in hand with wellness and occupant productivity, space as a service. And we're going to see more pressure to do more reporting on this in the future. I do want to point out also that we have a website sponsored by the Burnham-Moores Center called propsolutions.tech. The website's actually propsolutions.tech, where we list out about 250 of these firms. We're trying to add to that list. We're not endorsing anybody there, but it's a bit of a directory. Jim Young's website is realcomm.com, which is linked here. And then Funnel, we also have a link to the funnelleasing.com site. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to staff.
Sorry, I needed to unmute there. First of all, I want to thank our speakers, Caren, Jim, Jeremy. Great insight into a complicated field. Norm, thank you as always for being a great moderator. Thanks to all that attended here. Again, thanks to our sponsors. We will be sending out a post-event survey, and it will have links to the slide deck. So once you get that survey, you'll see the link there to the slide deck. So be on the lookout for that. You have an opportunity, if you want, to make a donation on our event registration page and also on the link that we're going to send out for the survey. If you choose to make a donation, great. And when you do, we'll send you a copy of the recording of today's session. We've got a few minutes to do a little breakout activity. So Diane, if you want to put up the breakout room slide, you can go, depending on the Zoom that you're on, you can self-select to go to a room. And if your Zoom does not allow you to do that, you'll stay on the main side, and then Diana will ask you what room you want to attend, and then she can just put you in.